Hello and welcome to Global Eye. I'm Parikshit Luthra. We are starting the show focusing on the Bangladesh Prime Minister Sheikh Hasina's visit to India. This is the first bilateral visit to India by a world leader since Prime Minister Modi took charge for the third term. This will be Sheikh Hasina's second visit to India in 15 days after she attended the swearing-in ceremony of the new government, and third visit since September 2023 when she came for the G20 summit. Bilateral trade between India and Bangladesh stands at $16 billion annually. Bangladesh exports to India amount to $2 billion. Both nations are likely to sign several MOUs to increase bilateral trade and strengthen the relationship. The issues likely to come up for discussion during her meeting with Modi include Dhaka's plan to develop cross-border Teesta Special Economic Zone, renewing the Ganga water-sharing treaty, supply of essential food items like wheat and onions, and management of the Mongla port, which is the second busiest port in Bangladesh after Chittagong, and India is considering developing it on the lines of Chabahar in Iran and Sitwe in Myanmar. China has already made a formal proposal for taking up the $1 billion project to develop the Teesta River, and India has raised security concerns over this as it is a border area. There will be discussions around the deteriorating situation in Myanmar, which shares its border with both India and Bangladesh. Joining me now is Shamsher Chowdhury, former Foreign Secretary of Bangladesh. He's also the recipient of Bir Bikram, the third highest gallantry award in Bangladesh. Also joining us is Ambassador Shashank, the former Foreign Secretary of India. Mr. Chowdhury, if I can begin with you, let me ask you about the significance of this visit. Sheikh Hasina, the Prime Minister of Bangladesh, is visiting India for the second time in 2 weeks. Next month, she heads to China. What is the strategic importance right now, according to you?
Thank you very much, Parikshit. But before I go to answer your question, let me say how wonderful it is to see my old friend Shashank. We were foreign secretaries together at the same time, and I really enjoyed working with him. In fact, I hope Shashank recalls that the land boundary agreement that eventually the Prime Minister Sheikh Hasina's government signed with India, Shashank and I was involved deeply in doing the initial paperwork. So nice to see you, Shashank. I hope you're keeping well.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
This is undoubtedly a very important visit, and not just for the substance of it, but also the timing. I mean, Prime Minister Sheikh Hasina was one of the few regional heads of government and states who were present or invited by Prime Minister Narendra Modi during his recent inauguration. But that was not bilateral, that was for a different occasion, although they had some discussions during that visit. But this is a far more substantive visit. It's bilateral. It's significant also that the Prime Minister of Bangladesh is the first foreign head of government to be visiting India after the current government in India has assumed office. So, it's a first
Right.
on many occasions. Now, as you very rightly pointed out, you broadly outlined what could be the issues that the two leaders will discuss, the two governments will discuss. On the larger framework, I would say that this is the time, because it's the beginning of the tenure of two new governments, both in Delhi and in Dhaka. So I hope this visit will lay out a roadmap for the relationship into the future, not just for the next 5 years, but perhaps for the next 25, 30 years onwards. So this is a historical relationship between Bangladesh and India. It's written in blood. Being a freedom fighter myself, a wounded one at that, I have very emotional attachment to our relationship with India and the importance that I attach to this relationship. Now, you said the Teesta water issue, and I'm glad to use the correct language for this, Parikshit, because it's not sharing of the Teesta waters, but management of the international rivers that between Bangladesh and India, because there is a water shortage everywhere, and we are both water dependent for our life and livelihood, agriculture, etc. And so we have to find ways for a long-term cooperative or collaborative arrangement where we learn to manage the water. The Tista is vitally important for us. It also, the strategic importance of Tista is near, north, and I rather have, India getting involved in it, and a positive outcome of how we look at this water management issue will have an enormous impact on building trust between not just the two governments, more importantly, between the peoples of the two countries. Our relationship in terms of connectivity is massive and is growing. I've been to Assam, I've been to Silchar, much better than I could before. Also,
Ambassador Chowdhury, I'm going to come to you once again. I want to get in an opening remark from Ambassador Shashank as well, and I'll come right back to you on the larger significance of the points on the table. Ambassador Shashank, China has been increasing its investments in Bangladesh as part of the Belt and Road Initiative for the past decade. Recently, Sheikh Hasina even inaugurated the first Chinese-built submarine base there in Bangladesh. The growing presence of China in India's neighborhood, is this a cause for worry right now?
Been talking for a long time about China's global ambitions, and they do have some impact on their neighboring countries in Asia. But let me first of all also welcome my old friend Shamsher, who is also a war hero and highly respected in Bangladesh. And I'm quite sure that he will be in a position once again as our speaker today, lay down the roadmap and the achievements which have been made so far in our bilateral relations. So what China has been doing is a global ambitions, and there is an impact on the neighboring countries also. We have to make sure that while we have some people in India who want to have India's global role, but that is a longer term project. I mean, initiate thing is Act East policy, building infrastructure linkages with our neighboring countries and our friendly ties with them so that we can all become stable, economically secure, prosperous. And I think that is the thing where I find that Bangladesh is one of the most important countries in India's neighborhood to promote these ambitions of India in the regional level. And I agree totally with Shamsher that they are talking about water management rather than water sharing. Because if you talk of water sharing, everybody feels, both in Bangladesh and India, that we are handing over our waters to some other country. Even among the states in India, there is a great reluctance on handing over waters to other states. So therefore, this water management is important, and cleaning of the waters, environmental impact of these waters, they are also very important. Now, what is happening? China is definitely causing concern to India by setting up submarine bases, other acquiring ports in the region. But that we have to meet those concerns on our own, because if we Chinese have deep pockets to spend money, and we ourselves don't have those kind of deep pockets, but we have the great advantage that we don't want to take a policy-making role in our neighboring countries or in any countries where we have partnerships. So we go according to their priorities. So therefore, this is the main issue. Right now, we have been trying to build up alternative linkages via Myanmar, via Bangladesh, via Iran, and via so many other countries. So this is the very major issue which India has been indulging in. Sometimes other countries at the global level are not very happy about it, whether it's China, whether it's USA, whether Western countries who would feel. But these are the after effects of partition, of Indian independence, where traditionally we used to go directly to our northeastern states through Bangladesh territory, through Myanmar. There were constant sea linkages. Now they have all been stopped. It's a great obligation on the part of the government of India and government of Bangladesh to build up those linkages once again. And I'm quite sure that this will have an impact on their own societies, their own fears of having destabilization impact of people who would not like us to prosper. I think I will leave it at that for the time.
Let me take that point. Let me take that point to Ambassador Chowdhury. Yeah, Ambassador Shamsher Chowdhury, if I were to come to you about the China question, considering the close defense and investment linkages between China and Bangladesh right now, would you say that Bangladesh's pivot right now is towards China, and this visit is a bit of a balancing act before Sheikh Hasina visits Beijing next month?
I don't think so. I think, you see, I define our relationship with India and with China in two different ways. With India, it is historical, it is strategic, it is geostrategic. With China, it is a major development partner. Now, if you recall, during our Prime Minister's visit to India, I think it was 2019, the joint communique issued after that visit said that Bangladesh-India relationships are based on history, language, and culture, which goes beyond strategic partnerships. So, and this was perhaps in response to the language used during the visit of President Xi Jinping to China, to Bangladesh, I think the same year, a few months before Prime Minister visit to India, where he said Bangladesh and China are now strategic partners, or relationship of strategic partnership, something like that. So I find it's not just a nuanced difference. I think there's a fundamental difference in this. And I see on the side, you're saying that China has granted Bangladesh 98% duty-free export, but it is the 2% that matters, because this 2% is what we actually can export. It's not the 98%. Our trade deficit with China is $21 billion. With India, we are now exporting $2 billion. There is a big trade deficit on our part, but it took us 40 plus years to reach $1 billion exports to India. And it took us only 5 more years to double that, to cross $2 billion. But to China, our exports are less than $1 billion. It hangs around $900 million. So in terms of trade, the figures are misleading. Yes, China is one of our biggest trading partners, but it is mostly import from China, not so much export from Bangladesh. Now, the other issue that the two leaders will discuss...
You're absolutely right, sir. There is a big trade deficit. Yeah,
unusual.
I'll come back to that thought, sir. Okay, absolutely. Ambassador Shashank, what do you think will be the priority for Prime Minister Narendra Modi when the two leaders sit together? Do you think there are some immediate concerns of importance that both leaders would like to thrash out, something that India would like to prioritize?
Well, Prime Minister Modi has given a target to the government that within the first 100 days, we should be able to carry out some very meaningful projects and complete them. I'm quite sure that Bangladesh Prime Minister has also similar concerns to prove her decisive role in taking Bangladesh forward. And India and Bangladesh, I think right now are in the right trajectory. They are moving closer together. They are both very secure in their thinking that the only way they can remove the destabilizing forces within their own countries is by cooperating with each other in a very clear-cut manner. I think this seems to be one, and this will include the frequent exchanges at various levels, and above everything else, as we were talking about the infrastructure connectivity-related projects, which have been talked about in various other regional multilateral forums also. And then there was a feeling that we should build a bilateral, trilateral, quadrilateral type of relations so that we can, whatever advantages we can get through these relationships, we do that. And I'm quite sure that this is building up very well, and we should be inaugurating this new connectivity between our Northeast and Chittagong port and be able to increase our trade through this, apart from Siliguri corridor, the trade linkages from between Northeast and India through Bangladesh port by September.
Right. Okay. My final question to Ambassador Shamsher Chowdhury, as we're running out of time. Ambassador Chowdhury, briefly, if you could tell us what would be that one priority that Sheikh Hasina would have, which can really cement India-Bangladesh ties in the long term?
Yeah, I think this is a very pertinent question. It's a question of fighting perceptions or dealing with perceptions that are in Bangladesh. And some of them are actually not just perceived, but real. You see, India has a very generous line of credit for Bangladesh. It's $8 billion, which is India's largest commitment to any country in the world. The problem is the utilization rate of that line of credit. So far, the last 10 years, it is only 20%, 21% of it has been used. And there are many impediments on the way. One is the bureaucratic entanglements, mostly on the Indian side, the interest rates, the kind of issues that come. So I hope the two leaders will find or agree on ways where the disbursement rate of Indian bilateral credit is restructured in a way that more projects in Bangladesh are financed through the Indian line of credit and in a faster pace. And this is where China has an advantage because they don't have that much bureaucratic issues to deal with. But India does have, which is probably normal for a democratic country like India. So these perceptions, these issues have to be addressed. And let us, find ways where we can. This is a concern in Bangladesh that India has promised $8 billion, but why only less than 20% of it has been used. Now, managing once the China built up, China is not managing or building any port in Chittagong. No, the biggest strategic port in Chittagong area is the Matabari port, which is 100% Japanese finance, Japanese technology, and Japanese management. The Mongla port is an issue where India has a deep interest. And I hope the two leaders will agree on how to find a solution that is a win-win for both sides, because ports are becoming a very important issue in terms of the geopolitics of the region, Indo-Pacific. The Belt and Road Initiative of China, frankly, my own take on that, it's not impacting in a major in Bangladesh. We are too far down south. It's perhaps more important for Sri Lanka or Maldives or Pakistan or Myanmar. But for Bangladesh, the BRI has very little traction. What does have a traction is the relevance of Bangladesh. The Prime Minister Hasina has taken Bangladesh to a level where we are important, we are relevant, and how China and Bangladesh can work together, address the concerns that prevail amongst the people in Bangladesh, that India is a historical friend, but India needs to do more to earn greater trust of the people of Bangladesh. And one way is to see more Indian investments, more Indian finance projects in Bangladesh, infrastructure and otherwise. And, I think the people-to-people contact is fine, and is growing. And connectivity is there, but it's not totally seamless. There are a lot of problems at the border that one has to face. Importantly, one must also recognize that the Indian High Commission's visa office in Dhaka is the largest Indian visa office anywhere in the world, which is actually a reflection of the amount of travel between our two countries by the people, ordinary people. I'm not saying just government-level people. So this is a very good thing.
We're running out of time. I'll have to leave it there, but that's a very important message that you leave us with. Yes, we have historical ties, but it's probably time for India to walk the talk on that historical friendship as well and win the trust of people of Bangladesh. Ambassador Chowdhury, Ambassador Shashank, thank you very much for joining us. We're heading into a short break on the program, but up next, US-China ties could be headed for more stress after US Congress delegation met Tibetan spiritual leader Dalai Lama at his residence in Dharamshala. A discussion with Robert Barnett of SOAS University when we return. Welcome back. US-China ties could be headed for more stress after US Congress delegation met Tibetan spiritual leader Dalai Lama at his residence in Dharamshala. The delegation was led by US House Foreign Affairs Committee Chairman Michael McCaul and included former US House Speaker Nancy Pelosi. While the visit itself could irk China, which controls Tibet, the comments made by Nancy Pelosi against the Chinese President Xi Jinping could be seen as a major provocation. Pelosi, while addressing Tibetans in Dharamshala, said, and I quote, "His Holiness Dalai Lama, with his message of knowledge, tradition, compassion, purity of soul and love, will live a long time and his legacy will live forever. But you, the President of China, you'll be gone and nobody will give you credit for anything." End of quote. The delegate spoke strongly in support of Tibet's freedom from China. US Representative Congressman Gregory Meeks said, and I quote, "China can express unhappiness if it wants to. We are going to stand for what is right." Let me now go across to Professor Robert Barnett. Thank you very much, Professor, for joining us. Give us a sense of why this visit is important right now. India has just concluded its elections. You had a major congressional delegation visiting, meeting the Dalai Lama, sending out a message to Xi Jinping, and after that, also calling on the Prime Minister of India, Narendra Modi.
Yes, I think you're right. This is an important delegation. There have been many such delegations from America and other countries to meet the Dalai Lama in the past, but this one has some unique features, some of which you just identified. But as everyone here knows, we're looking at a very important geostrategic juncture when the US and India are recalibrating their relationship in response to a rising China. And so it is an important moment, but we're also looking at other significant junctures. We don't know what's going to happen in the US elections. This may be the last sign of a kind of democratic dominated administration in America presenting its agenda on Tibet. So I think what's happening here is that Congress, this delegation is congressional, it's not executive. Congress is signaling to India that it wants the new emerging India-US relationship to include Tibet as a major element of its agenda. And it's further signaling that it thinks that Tibet is a kind of weakness, a vulnerability for China that could be seen geostrategically as an advantage for India. I think that's the messaging fundamentally that's going on here. But it is quite significant and quite different from previous delegations.
Now, the US Congress, Professor Barnett, has signed the Promoting and Resolution to the Tibet-China Dispute Act, which also approves of certain funding to counter disinformation from Beijing and counter China's narrative about its control over Tibet. Now, if President Biden were to sign this legislation, which China has been objecting to, what could be the possible ramifications?
Well, you make a very interesting point here. You know, most complaints from Western countries about China's policies in Tibet have focused on the human rights issues. And I think to China, these are really just background noise. They're routine. China can refute them. Western countries have a very mixed bad record now on human rights anyway. But this bill, this congressional bill, that they call it the Tibet Resolve Act, really is moving away from human rights as its focus to history as its focus. The disinformation that it requires America to counter is China's claims about its historical sovereignty in Tibet. And that is very significant change because that's the core issue for China. It's not really concerned about criticism of its abuses in Tibet. It's concerned about any questions marks over its claim to ownership of Tibet. And the bill, the delegation, and basically all these things were all written by Tibetan exiles. The Americans are really just performing to the exiles' request. That bill makes very clear that China has claimed historical ownership of Tibet in many different ways at different times. It keeps changing its narrative on when Tibet became part of China. For many years, until 2015, it said Tibet became part of China in the 13th century. Now it says Tibet became part of China as a local government in the 7th century. So essentially, the Americans are saying to China, your story keeps changing. You keep moving the goalposts. We are going to go to our government and tell our government to de-recognize your historical claim, which you keep changing, even though we're not going to challenge or ask our government to challenge your current claim. So there's an interesting kind of division here between current sovereignty, which they're not disputing, the Dalai Lama isn't disputing, and historic claims, which is what China desperately wants other governments to accept. So this bill and this delegation has a more significant cutting edge to it than we've seen in the past.
Right. Professor Barnett, we'd also like to ask you about the importance of India when it comes to the Tibet issue going forward, and also the succession to the Dalai Lama, the question around succession as well. Does this make India more important in future when it comes to developments between Tibet and China are concerned?
Well, I think you're putting your finger on the key issue here. What's happening and what the Tibetan exiles under their new leader, Pemba Tsering, seem to be articulating is a completely new understanding of China's strategic position on Tibet. It's always been seen as very powerful, very aggressive, very assertive, and having all the cards. That's beginning to change now because of the succession issue and because of India. On the succession issue, China is saying that only it has the right to decide the next Dalai Lama. It doesn't have to make that claim. It was really an unforced error because in the past, when China has tried to appoint its own people as religious leaders in Tibet, it's always failed. Tibetans have never accepted those appointees. In effect, China can only pull off the claim to control succession if it gets credibility and support and endorsement from the Dalai Lama before he dies. That means it's now the Chinese who have to negotiate, the Chinese who need to negotiate with the Dalai Lama, and time is running out for them to do that. And the country that really determines the way talks might go is India. And I suspect that India is already playing a significant role in the back channel talks between the Tibetans and China. It's not America. America is not the major player here. America is a background signaler about what are key issues. India is moving into the central place over this issue. It will probably determine whether the talks go forward, if China goes ahead with talks, maybe even what they might contain, and what will happen to the Tibetan exile community after the Dalai Lama dies. So the issue is becoming more and more significant in terms of India's role and its significance in India's relationship with China.
Right. Professor Barnett, US has a tense relationship with China. There is a trade dispute. There is a South China Sea dispute. India has a historical land boundary dispute with China as well. How does the Dalai Lama issue and Tibet give us some leverage over China? 2 years ago, Nancy Pelosi had visited Taiwan, and that had created outrage in China. Now you've got the visit to Dharamshala to meet the Dalai Lama. In future, in any kind of tense negotiations with China, how does this really help both India and the United States?
Well, I don't think we should be asking or wanting the Indian government to make public statements about this kind of issue or to use megaphone diplomacy. I think the Indians are very skilled at doing these things behind the scenes. But behind the scenes, the Indians have an opportunity to say to China that the one thing that China is really weak on is its legitimacy claim in Tibet. And we have to remember that India in the 1980s, when it recognized following the 1962 war that Tibet was part of China, did not say those words. It very skillfully said the Tibet Autonomous Region is part of the People's Republic of China. Much more sophisticated formulation than I think any other country has used, certainly much more sophisticated than the British used when they finally acknowledged China's claim to Tibet in 2008. So the Indians have only recognized China's contemporary sovereignty in Tibet post-1950. But they have not recognized, not commented on the historic claim. And this delegation now is pointing to China's vulnerability over its historic claims. It hasn't got other countries to recognize that. And so India is in a position to say to China, we have something that you very much want. We have many things that you very much want on the Tibet issue. These are crucial to your security. Tibet is 25% of your landmass. The Dalai Lama is a far more charismatic figure than any other leaders that have come out of China. We are able to broker with you a deal. Or
Professor Barnett, we're running out of time, unfortunately. Right. Thank you very much for those great insights. You're an expert on Tibetan history and what's going to happen there in the next few years and decades. Thank you once again for joining us on the program. With that, we come to the end of Global Eye. Thank you for watching. Goodbye.